stage Dr. Mika Tosca.
Wow, thank you guys so much. Thank you so much. I'm so humbled to be here. I'm excited about the invitation, and I'm eager to talk to you about the work that I do, which is going to be a really nice segue actually into tonight and the whole festival, because I'm also going to implore you, like Thomas, to use your imaginations. I think our imaginations are an immensely powerful part of our existence and our brains. And if we are to build a better future in the wake of climate change, then we have to imagine it first. So the title of my talk is Imagining a Post-Climate Crisis Future, Art, Music, Climate Change, and Overcoming the Apocalypse Narrative. And in the background here is a painting, which is not yet completed, but I'm working on a project with my student who is here actually today, so I'm really excited about that. As you all know, the climate is warming at a rate that is unprecedented in the last 2,000 at least years, if not longer. You can see the temperature record here showing a sharp spike at the end, an increase in temperatures that is largely due to human activity. This has caused storms and hurricanes to become more extreme. It's caused sea levels to rise, Arctic sea ice to melt, as well as glaciers and land ice, and heat waves to multiply. And actually, what I'm showing in this top right is a picture of the heat wave that we just experienced in Chicago in June when it was 100 degrees. And as I mentioned, this is all because of human activity. This is because human beings burn fossil fuels. Those fossil fuels emit greenhouse gases. Those greenhouse gases enter the atmosphere where they trap infrared radiation from the Earth. That infrared radiation prevents heat from escaping into space, and we have sort of a rampant warming scenario. And the models, the climate models, suggest that it's only going to get worse if we continue on this trajectory. So everything from the best case scenario to the worst case scenario projects an increase in global surface temperature, a decrease in Arctic sea ice area, with some projections suggesting that we will be ice-free by the middle of the century, an increase in ocean acidity, and an increase in sea level. And so this has led to a great deal of climate anxiety among the Gen Z students that I teach. I've asked them to articulate some of their climate anxieties for me, and so I won't read all of these, but I do want to focus on the last one here, which really kind of stung when I read it. One of my students said that one of their climate concerns is that as each coming generation is born and acclimates to this world, right, this climate, they won't have known a climate that was once more stable, and they won't know a normal. So depending on how rapid climate change is going on at the time, some folks may have a hard time even caring to reverse climate change because they're unable to grasp what's so wrong around them. So this is obviously a ton of anxiety, and it's leading to a lot of despair among my Gen Z students and others, in the greater population. And so how do we even begin to address the anxiety? I ask my students, and pretty much every public lecture that I give, I ask these questions at the beginning. So I'm going to do that now. First, I'd like to know, just raise your hand, if you consider yourself a part of nature or separate from nature. So if you consider yourself a part of nature, please raise your hand. And if you consider yourself separate from nature, please raise your hand. Okay, a couple scragglers. And then if we could do this in a controlled manner, if folks could just shout out or raise their hand and list a few words or things that come to mind when I say the word natural. Trees. Ocean. Birds. Air. Perfect. How about some words or things that come to mind when I say the word unnatural? Plastic. Tar. All of those. Pesticides. Capitalism. I would argue that the reason. So what I'm seeing here, and Unfortunately, as wonderful as you all are, your responses to that are not unique. Every time I give this talk, it's pretty much the same. Everyone insists that they're a part of nature, but when I ask for things that are unnatural, they list only things that are created by humans for humans. So there's a cognitive dissonance. I think rhetorically, we have separated ourselves from nature, but in our heart of hearts, we really want to be a part of nature. And the reason that we've separated ourselves from nature is not by accident. Just a little bit of light history on climate change and how we got here. In the 1700s, in Britain, coal was used very sparingly, mostly to heat homes or light street lamps. But with the invention of the steam-powered engine, the cotton industry made this transition from water wheel power to steam power, not because water was scarce or less powerful or more expensive. On the contrary, steam gained supremacy in spite of water being abundant, powerful, and cheaper. And none of this is actually in serious historical dispute. But historian Andreas Malm writes in Fossil Capital that the reason steam replaced water was because of capitalism and a misguided belief that growth would be and must be eternal. And coal factories could then be located in urban centers, thereby making it easier for factory owners to find and exploit labor. This is how we got the Industrial Revolution. So global warming is the unintended byproduct par excellence. A cotton manufacturer of mid-19th century Lancashire who decided to forgo a water wheel and invest in a steam engine, erect a chimney, and order coal did not, in all likelihood, entertain the possibility that this act could have any relationship to the extent of Arctic sea ice, the salinity of the Nile Delta, the intensity of the Punjab monsoon, the altitude of the Maldives, or the diversity of amphibian species in Central American rainforests. And so we have indeed separated ourselves from nature. And I argue in my work and in my public lectures that we need to reimagine our future as one where humanity and nature coexist. And Thomas was alluding to this earlier, and so I'm just, beating that drum a little harder, where we are part of nature, right? We need to define the boundaries between the natural and the unnatural. And so this brings us to the role for art. We're all here to see some art tonight, right? I start with this graph, which I think really highlights the need and the role that art can play in science communication. When Americans are asked how they see scientists, 90% of Americans consider scientists to be intelligent. However, only 54% of Americans consider scientists to be good communicators, and nearly half of Americans consider scientists to be socially awkward. Thomas also mentioned that climate change is a really difficult concept to grasp. Philosopher Timothy Morton writes in his treatise Hyperobjects about climate change and defines it as a hyperobject, an object that is both too large temporally and spatially for our brains to really understand. But it is indeed an object, right? It is an abstracted object. And so while we all encounter abstractions in our work, right, scientists, everybody, artists and designers, and that includes musicians, right, in particular, intelligently address abstraction and create objects every day. And so I think there's a really didactic role for art, which is epitomized by this Diane Burko show at the American Museum, where she paints various levels of abstractions of different climate change phenomena. You can see glacier retreat, Amazon burning, sea ice melting, that sort of thing. And so I think that this is a really sort of straightforward role that art can play. And so I'd like to show you a few examples of work that my students have done on this topic because it's cool. Here's one of my favorite images. It's called Climate Deniers on Vacation by one of my former students. You can see some really infamous climate deniers being depicted. Scott Pruitt, the Koch brothers, Rex Tillerson. They're sitting on what we call enigmatic megafauna or charismatic megafauna, the polar bear, which has come to sort of symbolize climate change in the Arctic. And in the background, the mountain relief is actually an abstracted representation of the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Here are some more examples from this past semester. On the right, there's a cartoon from one of my students called Welcome to Florida, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory what's going on there, right? On the left, this is a project by my student Phoebe Chen called White Pollution. where they strung together those little packing peanuts, which are, of course, very bad for the environment. They pointed a plastic fan that's sort of buried in dirt at them, and it makes this sort of eerie sound, right? And it's getting us thinking about the role that plastic and excess packaging and that sort of thing play in the whole climate change conversation. Two more examples, a quilt by my student Mika, sort of looking at the intersectionality of the climate crisis. And then on the right, this is a really cool project that one of my students made. It's a plastic Nestle water bottle, but it's actually made out of glass. And then the best part is that the plastic water bottle has actually been transformed into that little koozie that you see at the top, a completely useless koozie, which is kind of commentary on our obsession, again, with plastic. Some more examples, we have a Snapchat rant that one of my students made, and then the one on the right here, this video, my student Ola researched what the endangered species of bird in Chicago, which, if any of you know it, it's a really fun name. It's called the piping plover, along the Chicago shoreline. They researched what the piping plover's diet was, and then made them a cake. They put the cake at the lakefront and filmed it all day and spliced the video with information about both endangered species and climate change and the interplay between the two. And then I will conclude this section with a discussion of a really cool new project that I'm working on, which explores the role that electronic music, specifically house music and techno music, can play in the climate crisis. So let me explain, right? So my student, Grant Tyler, organized this panel back during the pandemic. Our goal was to have sort of a sound experience, a music experience, if you will, but we were relegated to the Zoom scenario back then. But we argued that techno music, right, and house music, and then for those of you who are from Chicago, you know that house was sort of invented here, so go us. Techno music can be a site for climate activism, right? Techno and house and electronic styles of music have often been sites for political activation, and I argue, and we talked about in this panel, the role that electronic music and these spaces can be as we address the climate crisis. And something that I'm really excited to announce is that in August, I'm actually going to be giving a talk at an electronic music festival about queer eco-futures and how we can create these worlds in these really cool music sites. But in addition to art being a way to improve our communication of science, I also think art itself can improve the scientific method and the way we construct scientific knowledge. So I'll run you through this really quickly. We've got a simplified representation of the scientific method. I know it's not linear like this. The scientists are like throwing tomatoes at me, but it's approximated by this process. We also have the human-centered design process, which in many ways is analogous to the scientific method, where you have hypothesizing, which is kind of analogous to ideation, experimentation, which is analogous to prototyping, on and on. But something that the design process and a lot of art making includes that the scientific method doesn't include as well and as forcefully as it should is this initial phase, this understanding phase, where we empathize, listen, and learn from stakeholders and other folks who are involved in the outcome of scientific knowledge. And when it comes to climate change, people who are involved in the outcome of that scientific knowledge production is everyone that lives on this planet. And so I think that we could incorporate, right, this understanding phase into the scientific method a little bit more robustly and thereby improve the production of scientific knowledge. You can read about the details of this and why I say these things and why I think these things in this paper, which was published last summer, which I'm extremely proud of. This is the first paper that I sort of published as a person that works at the intersection of art and science. And something that I'm actually the most proud of with this paper is that I got to cite Octavia Butler in the opening paragraph. For those of you who have read Octavia Butler, she's a well-known Afrofuturist writer. She imagines and constructs world in the wake of environmental disaster. And she often posits in her public speeches that science fiction, right, is not only about the problems of the world, but about solving the problems of the world. A sentiment, when expanded to include the broader art world, suggests an important role for art in confronting the urgency of climate change. And so I surmise that the propensity of art and design to harness the limitless potentiality of human imagination in a way that the post-Enlightenment scientific endeavor has historically been less able to do, can provide a framework for developing sustainable solutions to the climate crisis. Basically, we need to use our imaginations to envision and construct a future, right? If we're going to build that future. And so to that end, I'd just like to conclude by showing two projects that I've been working with former students, now collaborators on. The first is called Plastic City by a very talented student of mine, Eli. This is a multimedia project. The heart of it is an electronic music album. There's a theme here. This electronic music album called In Water. And Eli created this album in 2019. There's an accompanying zine, a software, and several music videos about this project. And so in this project, Eli imagines and envisions us living in the future on floating plastic cities in the ocean. And these are just some screenshots of the music video that Eli made that is available on YouTube, and you can also stream the whole album on Spotify. Do I think that we're going to be living on plastic cities floating in the ocean in the future? Probably not. However, if we are to build a future, right, when I say imagine, we really need to imagine. We need to stretch our imaginations, because if we constrict what we imagine for the future, that gets smaller and smaller, and eventually it's closed off to any solutions. If we expand our imaginations and expand our solution set, then we have a lot of things to choose from, a lot of options to choose from, and we can build a better future. And so to that end, I've been working with my student who's in the front row on a solar punk project. It's still in the nascent stages. These are some sort of unfinished in-progress paintings that Javi has made. He also sent me a playlist of all these really cool electronic songs that include environmental elements. So we're exploring how we can, envision futures that are positive, that are good, that are something to look forward to, rather than despair, dismay, and anxiety. And so I'll conclude with these two slides. First, a quote from my favorite, Octavia Butler, from The Parable of the Sower. This quote is incredibly powerful to me. It guides my research, it guides my activism. I think about it all the time, and I just want to read it and share it with you. The world is full of painful stories. Sometimes it seems as though there aren't any other kind. And yet I found myself thinking how beautiful that glint of water was through the trees. We cannot build a better world if we are submerged in despair and sadness and anxiety. We can only build a better world if we surround ourselves with joy and splendor and celebration and optimism. And so I'll conclude by saying that this isn't the end of the world, but it could be the end of this world. And that's probably a good thing, because we now have a radical and revolutionary opportunity to make the next world better, brighter, and more equitable. But if we don't first imagine the future that we want, we will never have the future we deserve. And we must incorporate diverse voices, which includes artists and musicians like tonight, if we are going to get to the next world. So with that, I say thank you and enjoy the performance. I'm not sure, but sure, go for it.
I actually had a question regarding the slide you had regarding the scientific method and combining it with design thinking. And I apologize in advance because I am neither an artist nor a scientist, so I'm drawing upon very, very basic information in high school science. But it ties somewhat to, I guess, my question around the platform of art as a means of eco-activism. And it's this idea of the scientific method sort of trying to incorporate and combine with the empathy and the emotionality that's tied to art. However, my basic understanding of the scientific method is emotion and even activism, which scientists would think of as a scientific method, which is something that's geared around removing bias, removing prejudices. So how do you incorporate that understanding component of design process into a scientific method in a way that would still be true to how scientists think of their work as being something that is absent or removes emotion and prejudices, and to extend from that, how do you see art being tied to climate change in a scientific way that doesn't undermine, somebody saying, well, it's great that you're presenting me and you're moving me with a beautiful song about the ocean. It's great that you're challenging me and seeking for a better world, but are you actually using science, or are you actually perverting and creating biases in the information that you provide me? So I'm curious about that.
It's a great question. I have a really long answer for it, which I don't think I have time for right now, but I will say a few things. Number one, scientists love to say that science is objective and unbiased. I don't think it's true, and maybe that's controversial, but science historically has been largely conducted by one identity of person, and I don't know that I need to say it out loud, but I think we all know that the stereotypical scientist looks like, and so they're bringing their life experiences to their work already, right? Science has already been sort of corrupted, if you want to think of it that way. Also, this version of science is relatively new. It's like a post-Enlightenment way of conducting science. If you think of well-known scientists, right, in the Renaissance or before in other cultures in other countries, they're artists, right? Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, etc. There's a lot of famous scientists, well-known scientists, who incorporate art. Even I think Isaac Newton was a painter. I could have that wrong, but I'm pretty sure. And so that's kind of my first answer to that. My second answer is not necessarily introducing emotion into the scientific method. It's more thinking about what your outcome could be, like what it could do, what you could accomplish with this knowledge production, and thinking about the ways that other people besides scientists construct knowledge and construct things. And so I think artists and designers construct objects, right? They approach problems differently. And so this schematic came out of a project that I did with a collaborator, a designer, where we redesigned one of our data delivery websites. And we worked with the design team to identify like sort of the things that scientists would need. And the end result was both a prettier data delivery site and also a more functional one, believe it or not. And it was, the scientists were shocked by how functional it could be and also look really nice. And so that process informed me that, scientists are so siloed in the way that we conduct our research, and we always stress collaboration and interdisciplinary stuff, but we don't actually do it. And so I think what I'm basically arguing for is let's do some actual interdisciplinary work, right? Which doesn't mean if I'm an atmospheric scientist talking to an oceanographer. It means if I'm an atmospheric scientist working with an artist, for example, or other things like that. But I don't want to take up too much time, but we can talk like after or something, because I've got a lot of thoughts on this. Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
Hey everyone, this is Laura from C2ST. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit like, follow, and subscribe. Also be sure to hit the bell icon so that you'll be alerted whenever we post a new video. Doing all of this will make our videos more visible to other STEM enthusiasts on YouTube. Thanks again, this is Laura signing off. We'll see you next time.